Welcome to another Miami Corona Project interview. I'm so thrilled today to have my colleague, University of Miami professor, Dr. Kerry Burnstein, a professor of molecular and cellular pharmacology at the University of Miami, who is one of 24 rapid response, COVID-19 rapid response grant awardees from the university's Office of the Vice Provost for Research. In her study, she investigates the potential link between androgen receptors and COVID-19 through the enzyme TMPRSS2 to provide data on whether certain drugs that are effective and safe for treating prostate cancer might also be effective in treating COVID-19. Dr. Bernstein, thank you so much for joining me today. I, like you, am one of these 24 principal investigators that the University of Miami has sought out to help us better understand on how to address this pandemic affecting South Florida. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah. How before we even start talking about your research and the impact of the pandemic, how are you, as a colleague, as a fellow neighbor of ours here in the broader Miami community, how are you doing? How has this pandemic impacted you, your family, your team at the University of Miami?
Oh, it's like everyone else. We've all been impacted greatly. My lab was essentially shut down for 3 months plus. The only work that we were doing was our COVID research, which was actually great because it gave us a sense of meaning. Amidst all the craziness and taking care of everyone. I'm also department chair, so I have to worry about everyone in my department. And I'm also associate director of education and training for our cancer center. So I'm really plugged in quite broadly at the medical school. But we're all doing all right. I mean, we've had cases among my colleagues and my personnel, but fortunately, everyone's doing all right.
Yeah. It's a really, really difficult time. That idea of closing down your lab is relevant. As an artist, I'm a faculty member at Art and Art History, so I too, believe it or not, do field research sometime. And one of the things I was hoping to do this coming year was try to go to Antarctica to work on one of my climate change projects with the McMurdo Dry Valleys LTER. But of course, Antarctica is closed for business. So that's not the important part. The important part that there are these longitudinal studies that this team has been doing there for years that now there's no one there to collect the data. There's no samples aren't being taken. And I'm wondering how this hiatus from your research, your non-COVID research, the research you were doing, how it impacts science broadly and how it impacts personnel and just how our school children across the county have had an abrupt change to the way they learn. Some of them not learning as much, most of them actually not learning as much.
Probably.
How does that impact science, research, just the day-to-day of a scientific pursuit?
Well, we're all in this together. So globally, everyone is having this problem. At UM, at the medical school, they did permit animal type studies that were ongoing to be finished. And I think this is really important because obviously you don't want to waste the lives of animals. You don't want to jeopardize those longitudinal experiments as you brought up. I think some of them were jeopardized, but the one thing I've actually noticed that has impacted science is that with labs being closed, people are writing up their work. And I'm seeing that, and I'm hearing that there are a lot of papers that are being submitted, manuscripts that are being submitted that are really not complete. So I think the rigor and the robustness of science is probably being affected.
Yeah.
And it's so hard because, I have my students really can only, my graduate students and my postdoc can only really do so much from home. And, you know, we would have meetings and we'd look over past data, but at the end of the day, it's a research lab and there's only so much that you can do virtually. And I'm sure everyone else is in the same position.
Yeah,
Now, how is it going to impact science long term? I don't know. I think, you know, some of these papers that may come out will probably be flagged and we won't be set back so much. But when poor science is published, that's a problem.
The bright side is, of course, what you've been doing for the past few months as part of this effort. And I just wanted to have you talk to us a little bit about COVID and you're looking at, I think, therapeutic responses to COVID. Maybe, again, just for folks who aren't as aware, the difference between that and a vaccine, and of course, what all of us are in broader society focusing on, which is the preventative components.
Sure. Or your question is, why is a prostate cancer researcher studying coronavirus?
Yes.
So in late March, right before these applications were due, a publication came out in a very prestigious journal. And what this publication did was to identify the 2 proteins on human lung cells that are required for the virus to get into cells. The coronavirus CoV-2 has to get into cells to be infectious, of course. And so there were 2 of these receptor proteins. One is called ACE2 and one is called TMPRSS2, TMPRSS2. We just call it TMPRSS2 to make it easier. So the virus has a protein on its surface called the spike protein, and that spike protein binds to ACE2, which is on human cells, human lung cells on the surface, and then that starts the process of processing this S protein that's required for the virus to get in. The second protein to come into play is this TMPRSS2. As you mentioned, it's an enzyme, and it can actually cut the S protein, and that's required for the virus to gain entry into human cells. So trust me, I was not the only one to think of this when TMPRSS2 was published, because people who work in prostate cancer, and particularly in the androgen receptor, which is the protein that is responsible for the actions of testosterone, people who work in that field heard TMPRSS2 and we were like, wow. That is a very classic protein in the prostate that's regulated by testosterone and androgen receptors. So that protein is required. We know that it's regulated by testosterone and the androgen receptor in prostate. We know that that protein is very important for the virus to gain entry into human lung cells. So the question is really very straightforward, and that is, do lung cells work like the prostate, at least vis-a-vis TMPRSS2 regulation? Now, why is that important therapeutically? So one of the gold standard, the gold systemic standard for treating prostate cancer is called androgen deprivation therapy. So testosterone is an androgen and it works through the androgen receptor. And so since the androgen receptor is so important in propelling prostate cancer, for more than 75 years, we've known that one way to treat this disease, prostate cancer, is androgen deprivation therapy. So the thought is, can we repurpose drugs that have used for androgen deprivation therapy for COVID-19? The idea being, is TMPRSS2 regulated by androgen receptor in lung, and can that be blocked by these drugs that are already well established and that are safe? And these drugs have actually been used in women too, for certain breast cancers. So this idea is to reposition a drug for another purpose. The reason that's attractive is because it doesn't have to go through FDA approval. And so it can happen very rapidly.
And a history of medicine is filled with these ideas where there's this drug that impacts this, and then we discover that it has another. Can you give me an example of two or three or one of those classic ways in which a drug made for this now also takes care of that?
Oh, I mean, there's.
Yeah, no, there's 100.
I'm actually blanking. I'm blanking on a good example, but there is, well, probably aspirin is an example. There are antibiotics that have classically been done. I'm probably going to certainly some antidepressants. Mm-hmm. I think there's so many.
We're riddled with them, right? And that's the beauty of science, the ability to do that. So actually, it wasn't weird for me to learn about your study. I just I'm thrilled that our university is approaching this, and I'm just wondering. I know it's soon, but what are you doing with it? It's in the lab. Are there?
What's actually happening in the lab? So we do not work on infectious viruses at UM. Not those type of viruses, not because they require a safety level called BSL-3, which is a very high level, and it can only really be done in a few places. We are asking a very fundamental question that we think needs to be done before we can really move forward with this. And that is, we've got a panel of different types of lung cells, and we're asking the question, does androgen regulate TMPRSS2 in those lung cells, and can we block it with antagonists? So we are just focusing on normal lung cells and also some lung cancer cells, which are a convenient tool, and asking that fundamental question. Now, I should mention that there are already clinical trials being planned just based on this thought that androgens regulate TMPRSS2. There are already clinical trials with certain androgen deprivation drugs for COVID-19.
In your study specifically, when will you, do you have a timeline, a sense of?
Yeah, we're finishing up basically our studies. Science requires so much reproducibility, and we're looking at a number of different lines, and a number of different cell types. And that's the other thing that really does need to be focused on. The lung has such a massive variety of cell types, and coronavirus only infects some of them. So obtaining models that are going to be, that'll recapitulate what happens in human lung has been challenging as well. We also, in this proposal, we wrote that we would also study another hormone called Dexamethasone, which you may have heard about in the news. Dexamethasone works through another type of protein, but it's related to the androgen receptor. And there are some studies that the protein through which dexamethasone mediates its actions, the glucocorticoid receptor, may also regulate TMPRSS2. So that's the second half of this study. We're finishing up the androgen receptor aspect, and we're moving into, does this other steroid hormone, dexamethasone, regulate? And that's been really exciting because dexamethasone has been found to be useful in COVID pneumonia. Now, I should also say, we've taken a very reductionist approach. We're just taking lung cells. We're treating them with steroids. But the truth is, these steroids have effects on all different tissues. They have systemic effects on the immune system. And so all these things can come into play. But this is a very small, short grant and something that we could accomplish in a few months.
Like you, I was involved in my research. This is my research, working with you, interviewing you, and creating this platform. And I saw the grant just like that you did, and it's a very small amount of money for a very small period of time.
Right.
So we were focused on it, and then we said, sure, let's work with the university to advance what we're doing. So through it, I was able to have a couple of student assistants help me produce what we're doing here. And like you, this is your work, and you were focused on it, and you are now advancing science in this way. Do you know, you're my first colleague in this COVID-19 rapid response team that I interview. Have you had a chance to interact? I know we're on a Microsoft Teams and all that, but have you had a chance to interact with any of the other 22 individuals?
Only one of them, because he happens to be in my department.
Okay.
So we talk frequently.
Yeah. I'm excited, that our university so quickly and so rapidly moved on this. And of course, the research they're doing is just beyond these very small, time-sensitive grants.
I agree completely. I was really impressed with how quickly they came up with this mechanism, how quickly the money came. They had a lot of foresight. I think this was the vice provost's office and the provost that really put this through. And I know that the other person in my department who has one of these grants, Dan Isom, who you'll talk to, this has been pretty pivotal in sort of shifting some of our research focus. There's no way I would have done it otherwise. And so it's just been really exciting. And I have to applaud the university as well.
Yeah, I am, for the most part, a social practitioner and environmental artist who is focused intently on this Miami Corona project, this issue. I do see incredible connections, like you do with your research, with the work I do, between pandemics and the environment and climate crisis and all the societal issues attached to it from an equity point of view, access to healthcare, all that. So it is very much in my wheelhouse. And I'm just listening to you, and the same thing applies here. Like, these are areas that you research, and here's a way of addressing this issue. So I do see that, that synergy between our traditional work and what we do here.
No, absolutely, absolutely. There has to be that interface, but it does push you. Trust me, I really knew nothing about the lung, virtually. And now I know all about the different cell types, and I didn't know that much about virology really either. So I actually wrote a grant to the VA based on this project. It will get reviewed later in the month. But it definitely pushes you into areas that you are not comfortable with necessarily, but it gives you that foundation to really build from.
I think in broader society, there's so many individuals who didn't even know what an epidemiologist was, or much less
absolutely
viral loads, or whatever, everything it's just in the tip of everyone's tongue. So in a sense, what's happened to you and to me, I think is happening to broader society, right? Where they're more science conversant.
Absolutely. It's a very exciting time for scientists to see this.
Right. I mean, not to get political, but there's other parts of society that are refuting and denying the science too. So it's how we society navigate through this so that evidence-based research is what dictates policy and stuff like that.
I think the truth is those people have always existed, but the ramifications of not believing science are really being realized.
Right.
Some of the other ramifications affect small pockets of people.
And to that end, what recommendations do you have? Again, you are not an infectious disease expert, right? I'm not asking.
Not remotely.
Not even remote. I mean, that's not what you do.
Yeah.
Thank you for all the work you do in saving lives with cancer. Thank you for your lifelong passion and dedication for that. I mean, that's critical. So thank you. But as a doctor, as a scientist, as someone who is in the conversation of how COVID-19 can be addressed, what recommendations do you have to improve the present day situation? And it doesn't have to be, directed to the stuff at your lab. Just as a fellow resident, we know how it's impacted Miami-Dade County.
Yes.
We are considered the epicenter of this pandemic right now, the global epicenter of this pandemic. I was just watching Carlos Migoya from Jackson Hospital on
Yeah.
TV this morning talking about where we are, and even some of the employees at Jackson, being infected. So there is a crisis that's only going to get bigger in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So we know how the pandemic has impacted Miami-Dade County. What recommendations do you have to policymakers, to families, just to the general public, on what we need to do to improve the situation now?
Yeah, well, as I heard recently, or as was discussed recently, I think the big problem came that we had a set of metrics for reopening, and we didn't even meet the first of those metrics. And so I think the advice would be, let's follow our rules. I mean, it's not that hard. I mean, it is hard. Granted, it is hard. There's so much of personal, wealth and economics and small businesses. But if there are a set of rules and people aren't abiding by them, this is what happens. I mean, you don't have to be an infectious disease person. But I think it's that, you're right. I think it's that mistrust of science and medicine. But we were so successful early on that I think people just didn't believe that this
isn't that ironic? In other words, we were so good at staying in place. We were so good, and people said, well, look, nothing bad happened. And then I think there was that mistrust of science, but really what made that happen is, I believe, a lack of a single message. There were mixed messages sent out to the community. And you mentioned a bunch of reasons for economic, and there's also the psychological stressors of being enclosed in a home. And I think the other part is the necessity of having to leave that house, the equity I was talking about, to basically feed your children. So that, the lack of proper testing, and it's me having an opinion here, but the lack of proper testing. There's a lot of mixed messages and rosy-colored decree, sort of like, basically, we're done, we won, it's okay. That precipitated what I think was
exactly. There was very much that sentiment, and it's so frustrating, and we're paying for it now.
What lessons, broadly, not just not having bad communication between local leaders, or local versus state and national, just besides that lack of communication and whatever other aspects of human frailty that doesn't allow you to, stay the course, we
also have to cut everyone slack.
Right.
This virus is 6 months old? And we're learning as we go along. And maybe that's actually, I think, what non-scientists should appreciate. We're learning, and we are adjusting our models as we proceed. So just because we changed our minds doesn't mean we're useless. I mean, we as the broader sense. Physicians treating COVID-19 are doing much better now. There were, certain procedures that were in play based on pneumonias, but that have now changed and are more effective. So I guess people just really need to understand that it's a evolving process. We don't just come up with a decree and it's like, okay, this is the way it is, and we're not going to change.
It's a new virus. We're learning all sorts of things. You've spoken a lot about the lung, but obviously we're seeing that it's systems wide, right?
Well, that's the very, very scary aspect of it. And what I find really frightening is the prospect of long-term repercussions, particularly in young people.
Yeah, I worry about that too, because there's this We were all young, so we thought we were immortal, when we were 16, and I just and again, the signals that were sent is, this doesn't affect young people. So coupling that with your sense of, invincibility, I think and the fact that youth clustered together a lot more and with many others than those of us who then, sort of get older,
Right.
was it was a perfect storm for the catastrophe we see now. And we were hearing the cases. We remember the story just a few days ago about the 30-year-old who went to the COVID-19 virus party, right? And
I know. God, it's so tragic.
he died and said, "Oh my God, it wasn't a hoax." So I do think that our younger populations are starting to understand. I mean, I hope we had them at empathy, right? Let's not kill your grandma. But there's this other point where it's like, wow, it's also about that. I think one of the things that I'm seeing is that people who it might be hard for people to understand how a protein impacts physiology because they don't understand what proteins do or how they're made. They don't understand that everything I am doing is protein based. They think of proteins as a shake. Might be nice for you to explain that in a snippet, just so that people get, yes, proteins aren't something you put in a shake and drink. Proteins are made by your cells and everything you do.
Right. So, I guess these proteins are really gatekeepers, and they're gatekeepers for the virus to get into cells. And if the viruses can't get into cells, or if the virus gets in more poorly, it will wreak less effects.
So the cell membrane is covered by all these.
The cell membrane is dotted with not just proteins, but a variety of different molecules. And so if you view these ACE2 and TMPRSS2 as really, I actually like that kind of gatekeeper analogy. I've also heard sort of a lock and key analogy. Right. If you think about this surface protein on the virus, I always use protein. It's just part of our lingo. The virus has this other protein on its surface. If that's a key and these gatekeepers are locks, it can gain entry by opening the lock, basically.
Right.
So maybe that's an analogy that's more accessible.
I like the lock and the key analogy. So what you research is how the locks and keys work with prostate cancer, and you're saying, wow, is one of these keys also a key that impacts a lung cell, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So, and if the key that impacts a lung cell happens to be the one that COVID-19 is using,
do they share that in common?
Then you know how to treat prostate cancer. So can we use it now to treat this other disease, COVID-19, coming into the lung? So just like that is a very clear way of explaining that. I fear that people don't understand microbiology or how infectious diseases are spread. And when I was I wasn't a boy, but when I was 16 and 17, I actually worked at the burn unit while I was in high school. And then throughout university, I worked at the ICU and MICU over at Jackson. So I knew what hand washing was. I also knew that if I'm changing a burn dressing, I can't, put that gauze on a table, how to keep things sterile. So I'm very aware of how a virus can get from a pizza box, to my mouth, right?
Right.
But most people don't understand these things. So I think that's also part of a problem that or that they've been conditioned to think that family members are kind to one another. So a family member isn't going to have a virus. Or thirdly, they're conditioned to trust that, that you said you're not, okay, then you're not. And again, this thing has no symptoms. So when you, adding to all the stuff we just talked about, there's not a profound understanding on how infectious diseases get transmitted. It becomes the kind of problem that we have now. And I know we simplify it to important things: wear a mask, wash your hands, social distance. But there's a lot of things that people may do and they don't understand that as well. And I don't know how to solve that problem.
Well, you said this yourself. I think people get it now.
Yeah.
I really do. People, you know what it sort of reminds me of? Being in South Florida. We all become amateur meteorologists, right? We know about steering currents. We know about the mountains of Hispaniola. There are things that when they impact you, you learn about. And so I think globally, people understand how viruses can infect people and be contagious.
Well, then that leaves us with, I don't know that everyone does, clearly not everyone does, but then those who do, and don't wear masks, those who do.
You know, I was talking about this with my husband yesterday, and maybe part of the problem is that we have been focusing on wear a mask to protect other people, but wearing a mask protects you too. And maybe we were just appealing to we were taking the wrong approach, perhaps.
You know what? I did that with climate change for the longest time. And
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. For the longest time, I've planted acres of mangroves on Biscayne Bay, teaching people about ecosystems and planting trees to protect biodiversity, all these sorts of problems about taking care of our planet. And just in the last few years, I've started doing work that's about your house and your income. Like sea level rise hits you, and unless you act, you will suffer. And I hate to do that because, again, I'm trying to have a more loving, caring, compassionate world where wearing a mask just because you're going to save someone else's life should be good enough. But I hear you, because we also think, no, I'm not sick, so I don't need to take care of, worrying about someone else. Again, you don't have the knowledge to know whether you're sick or not because it has no symptoms. But yeah, I hear you. I think in these practices where we're trying to communicate to broad audiences and modify behavior, the more self-interest, the better. And of course, it's in everyone's self-interest for no one to be sick, because that means we can all get back to work. You can get to your lab, and I can go to my studio and paint in my studio. But while we have sickness out there, while the whole has a problem, then the individual has a problem. And I think that's hard to get into people's heads, because we're so about the here and now and the instant gratification that we can't get beyond that immediate family, that immediate instant gratification.
That's very true. I mean, the whole concept of instant gratification is very interesting to me. They actually say that, I've read a study that people, well, I guess we're getting off the topic.
No, this is a conversation. This is what it's supposed to be.
Yeah, I read a very interesting article a while back that successful people have something in common, and that is they can delay gratification. And I thought that was really fascinating.
Yeah. I think I live that.
You're quite a Renaissance person. It's really very interesting where your art has taken you.
Yeah. Well, it all started at the U, right? I got 3 degrees from that place, and I'm so honored to be part of the faculty. Again, I right out of law school, I was working over in the Department of Psychiatry as Director of Juvenile Violence and Delinquency.
You went to law school too?
Yeah. At the U. Yay. But it's a great place to engage in an interdisciplinary practice, because I can sit on part of a grant project with 23 other peers from all other disciplines. I'm one of those U-Link teams where I work with law, climate science, and economy, and addressing climate migration. I'm really thrilled and honored to be part of this, of my alma mater's, faculty, because it's just a wonderful place to teach future generations by doing what you and I are doing now, learning together. So it's been really awesome to connect with you, to talk to you.
Yeah, this has been a lot of fun. I enjoyed learning about your really fascinating background, and this project is very cool. You have to credit I credit you for coming up with it, but you have to also credit them for funding it.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, and to do it in this interdisciplinary way. I mean, there's teams of individuals coming together, and it's look. I think what I love about what this university is doing with its research, that it's not just research that is, self-absorbed or navel gazing. It's research with applications. Clearly, it's how does Miami's university stay relevant in leading and teaching the broader community? How did the work an artist and a scientist and a philosopher do at the University of Miami do better for the people of Miami and the broader hemisphere? And Miami is that wonderful place because, of course, what happens here at this level has impacts globally, not just in medicine and art, but in every aspect of industry, because we are the capital of Latin America. We are an international global city.
Absolutely.
So what we develop, and in our city, it's a demographic that is looking more and more like the rest of America will look. So this beautiful laboratory called home is a great place to develop knowledge that we can then apply in this community and learn from that, and then disseminate it and make ours a better world. So yeah, kudos to my you, right? For
Absolutely. Well, I think President Frank put it best. He once said, "We have the power of place."
Exactly.
Which I really loved.
Heard that, but that's exactly right. That's what I was trying to get at. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Well, let's try to continue to make this place better. And I so, as a guy impacted by this pandemic, like everyone else, I'm just so happy that scientists like you have our back, that you're looking at things from different perspectives and innovating and doing everything you can to advance humanity. Thank you so much for the work you do.
Well, thank you for yours.
Okay.
Bye-bye.